Hello class, welcome to chapter 13 of Vulnerability Assessment and Data Security. Today we're going to be going over on how to assess the security posture of an enterprise, define vulnerability assessment and explain why it's important, explain the differences between vulnerability scanning and penetration testing, describe techniques for practicing data privacy and security. So assessing the security posture. The first step in any security protection plan begins with an assessment of the security posture of the enterprise. It will reveal existing vulnerabilities that must be addressed. A variety of techniques and tools can be used. So, before you even begin a security program, you need to assess where you're at. You need to know where your flaws are, where your bottlenecks are, and how you can optimize and make your information security program better. Forget about risk right now. Forget about getting the staff. Right now, the first thing you want to do is get a snapshot of where you are. What is your security maturity level, right? And you get your assessment to address, what's your security posture, and once you get that, then you can develop plans based on initiatives based on where you're lying at. It can help you identify your priorities of where to, allocate resources or what resources you need. So pretty much getting that, addressing or identifying your security posture will help relate back into the direction that you need to go towards, or it will help you align your strategic plan and your 5-year roadmap, or if you're an ISO, your roadmap of where you want to go. So what is a vulnerability assessment then? Vulnerability assessment is a systematic and methodical evaluation of the security posture of an enterprise. It examines the exposure to attacks, forces of nature, any potential harmful entity. So, aspects of a vulnerability assessment is asset identification, threat evaluation, vulnerability appraisal, risk assessment, risk mitigation. So pretty much, where's your maturity at? Right, this is different than a vulnerability scan. Vulnerability assessment is more of a holistic approach of everything. Where do you stand? So asset identification, it's one of the first things you need to do in an organization. It's pretty much inventorying everything you have, whether it's people, physical devices, data, hardware, software, it doesn't matter. Inventory everything you have to an economical value. Make sure you can associate who has what and how much it costs, and you can tie it back into a purchase order. When you get audited at the end, they will come and look through your asset inventory or asset management program. So it's important to have asset management policy, process, and procedure in place. Because at the end of the day, you can't protect what you don't know you have, right? If there's shadow IT or rogue devices on your network that's being used for for work-related devices, and it's holding sensitive information or data of the company, you can't protect it because you don't know you have it sufficiently. It's a risk to the organization at the end of the day. After inventory has been taken, it is important to determine each item's relative value, factor to consideration how critical the asset is to the goals organization, how much revenue it generates, how difficult it is to replace, and impact of asset unavailability to an organization. So if we go back here, we said, with an economic value. When we're talking about economic value, we're not talking only monetary, but like how important it is to the organization as well. Some organizations assign numeric value, 5 being very valuable, 1 being least, and then there's being very least. Then we go into threat evaluation. Threat evaluation lists, you essentially list potential threats that come from threat agents. Threat agent is any person or thing with the power to carry out a threat against an asset. Threat modeling. Threat modeling is a process by which potential threats, such as structural vulnerabilities or the absence of appropriate safeguards, can be identified, enumerated, and mitigations can be prioritized. It allows you to understand who the attackers are, why they attack, and what types of attacks might occur. So in threat modeling, the goal is to pretty much understand attackers and their methods, often done by constructing threat scenarios. Attack tree. Attack tree provides a visual representation of potential attacks, drawn as an inverted tree structure. So attack tree, you can think of as an inverted tree, and then every branch that goes down is a potential impact. After that, threat has been exploited. So threats, natural disasters, compromise of intellectual property, espionage, extortion, failure, human error, sabotage, software attacks, software failures, theft, utility interruption. And here's a threat evaluation. As you see, attack tree scenario. The threat is a steel car stereo, and the way they level 2, what they'll do to the threat is to steal the car stereo, right? How they will do it, they can either break the glass, steal the key, or carjack, right? If they steal the key, they need to grab the purse and make a copy of the key. If they choose a route of make a copy of the key, they must threaten the attendant, blackmail the attendant, bribe the attendant, right? So it goes into detail of how each scenario will play out if the threat was to be gone through. Attack tree of stealing car stereo, and here's a attack tree for logging into restricted account. The threat for logging into a restricted account. How can they do it? Steal the password, learn the password, or guess the password, right? If they learn the password, how are they going to learn the password? They can either find it written down somewhere or get the password from the user. If they go the route of get the password from the user, how are they going to get the password from the user? Either social engineering or shoulder surf, or install a keylogger to get the keystrokes of the password. So vulnerability appraisal. Vulnerability appraisal determines the current determine current weaknesses. It takes a snapshot of your organization's security. Every asset should be viewed in light of each threat, and you then catalog each vulnerability. So it determines the current weakness holistically. A risk assessment. So risk assessment determines the damage that would result from an attack. Assesses the likelihood that vulnerability is a risk to the organization. So risk is determined by the potential impact times the potential impact times the likelihood of the threat being exploited. So and so in a risk assessment, you essentially look at each asset and say, what's the likelihood of this being exploited times what is the impact, and then you kind of determine your risk assessment, and you can categorize your you can then categorize your asset based on high, medium, low, or another scale grading scale of your choosing. But it allows you to identify standard risk, to identify the risk of an asset, right? By calculating the total potential impact and the likelihood of threat. So risk assessment impact, it's either no impact, small impact, significant, major, catastrophic. These are just like 5 forms. Remember, there's different scalings. You can either go low, medium, high. That's what FISMA does based on FIPS 199. Or, this 5 level scale. So risk mitigation, right? Risk mitigation, you determine what to do about the risks, determine how much a risk can be tolerated. So one of the biggest things that organizations do not understand is their risk tolerance. Or even, to be honest, most organizations don't even have a risk management program, but it's important to identify each organization, like your enterprise or your organization's risk tolerance. How much risk can they actually take on? And then you can make better decisions on how you want to act upon a specific risk or threat, on a specific threat based on the risk assessment you've done on it. Whether you want to either accept the risk, mitigate the risk, transfer the risk, or ignore the risk. So vulnerability assessment, action, asset identification, steps, inventory assets. So the different vulnerability assessment actions. So asset identification, right? We inventory the assets and determine the assets' relative value. And then the next step is threat identification. Classify the threats by category, and then design an attack tree. Vulnerability appraisal. Determine current weaknesses in protecting assets, and use vulnerability assessment tools. Risk assessment. Estimate impact of vulnerability of an organization. Calculate risk, likelihood, and impact of the risk. And then risk mitigation. Decide what to do with the risk. Essentially, you can either accept it. So for risk mitigation techniques, there's 4 different types. After you've done a risk assessment, you can either transfer the risk, accept the risk, ignore the risk, or transfer, ignore, accept, mitigate the risk. So when you when you accept the risk, you pretty much say, yes, I'll take it on. I accept the risk. I'm willing to take on the risk. If it comes, it comes. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Ignoring the risk, you just don't deal with it. You literally ignore it. When you're talking about transferring the risk, when you transfer the risk, you take that risk and give it to like a third party to take on the responsibility of the risk, or to help mitigate that risk, or take the liability of that risk. And the last one, mitigate the risk. You go in and try to mitigate that, and remediate that risk. Most of the times, you're gonna, if you have a proactive security team and you have the funding, you're gonna go be mitigating the risk most of the time. Contingent upon resources. So vulnerability assessment tools. There's several tools: port scanners, protocol analyzers, vulnerability scanners, honeypots, honeynuts. banner grabbing tools, crackers, command line tools, other tools. There's a lot of tools. TCP/IP communication. TCP/IP involves information exchange between one system's program and another system's corresponding program. Uses a numeric value as an identifier to the application and services on these systems' port numbers. So, essentially, TCP/IP communication, if you want to communicate via service, whether it's DNS, HTTP, Telnet, whatever it may be, there's usually a port number associated to it. And what port number, a unique identifier for applications and services, 16 bits in length, and that's why there's only a maximum amount of number of ports that can actually be out there. It's 2 to the 16th power. So it's 65,536 distinct values, 2 to the 16th power. So, still talking about ports, TCP/IP. The ports are usually are divided into 3 categories. Well-known ports, which are reserved and used for most universal applications, are 0 through 1023. These are usually universally known. Registered ports, there are other applications not as widely used, and that's ports 1024 to 49151. And then we have dynamic and private port numbers, also known as ephemeral ports, which is 49152 through 65,535. These are available for only application. This is available for any application use. So usually when you're doing your TCP using communicating back and forth, if you're going over port 80 to right, your destination port is port 80, but your own port is actually an ephemeral port. So ephemeral ports are usually dynamically assigned. They can be anything when you're communicating. Oops. So knowledge of what port is being used, it's important to know the ports, and attackers can specifically target what ports are most used most often, usually port 80 and 443. 53 is usually open sometimes, not for all organizations, which is DNS. Make sure 23 is very exploitable, port 23, which is Telnet. So port scanner software, pretty much port scanner software is literally just scans your network, your host. It can be your host, it can be your firewall. It just literally just looks for what ports are open. Is port 80 open from the outside? If it is, yeah, it'll show open. It'll show a port state of open. If it's closed, that means it is off. And then if it's blocked, that there's actually a rule in there that's saying it's blocked. And just to reiterate one more time, so open meaning the port's listening and that port is open. So closed means that the port is listening, but it's not, it's getting a response back, but it's not, but it's closed, I guess. Blocked meaning that when you scan it, the port is, when it's saying the port is being blocked, it means that the communication to determine whether it's being blocked, open or not, that communication is not going all the way through. That means it's that port specifically is being filtered, meaning, or blocked. It can be either called blocked or filtered, meaning it's being blocked / filtered. That's because you have a firewall rule in place, or something like that. Firewall or, yeah. So protocol analyzers, hardware or software that captures packets to decode and analyze contents, also known as sniffers. So common uses for protocol analyzers used by network administrators for troubleshooting, characterizing network traffic, security analysis, can be used to fine-tune the network and manage bandwidth. So essentially, protocol analyzers, sniffers, Wireshark. So sorry. This, for example, this protocol analyzer is called Wireshark. It essentially listens to the communication between two. You can set it up, and you can capture all the traffic going back and forth between whatever host you want. So you can set up Wireshark on your host. There will be a lab later for you guys to play around with it. But essentially, when you're going to like a web page or trying to talk to another web host, all that traffic will be captured here, and you can analyze and review the payloads and the traffic going back and forth. And this is Wireshark's one of the tools that attackers use to capture the data going back and forth, and potentially there may be some passwords or credentials in there that they can snag out and use it for nefarious actions. In labs. So remember, there should be a lab that you guys will be playing with to that has Wireshark, if I'm not mistaken. So vulnerability scanners, just a generic term used for a wide variety of products, used to scan your environment. Some include Nexpos, OpenVOS. There's a lot of vulnerability scanners out there. And vulnerability scanners, essentially, it scans your network, hosts, devices, looks for open and known vulnerabilities, including CVEs, and it doesn't have to be just Microsoft or operating system vulnerabilities. It's also software vulnerabilities, for example, Adobe, or like Adobe, right? And there's essentially two types of vulnerability scanners. There's an active scanner and passive scanner. An active scanner essentially sends probes and actually communicates back and forth with the device itself that's scanning, and it can take remediation actions if needed. A passive scan is very low key. It scans and gathers like fingerprints of the operating system and some other little things, but it doesn't directly interact with the thing that is scanning. The active scanner tends to, if someone's doing reconnaissance, trying to breach someone, and they run a vulnerability scanner, they will tend to use a passive scanner first, because an active scan will kind of set off triggers for the security team, and they're like, oh, why is someone scanning us, right? So a passive scan is more evasive, right? They hide there. It's more hidden because you're not directly talking with or interacting back and forth with what you're scanning. And it cannot take action to resolve security problems because it's trying to hide, be evasive. A vulnerability scan can alert when a new system has added to the network. I know Tanium does a great job of this. Also, what else is it? McAfee does a really good job of this too. And there's several scripts you can write. Windows Defender does it really well if you have the right scripts in place. It can detect, so it doesn't have to always be a vulnerability scanner. Detect when an application is compromised. Detect when an internal system begins to port scan other systems. Detect which ports are served and which ports are browsed for each individual system. So a vulnerability scanner can pretty much scan an application and determine what's running on it, what services are happening, and what ports are open and what ports are not opened as well. Used for attackers to get a little more reconnaissance. It can also identify which application and servers host or transmit sensitive data, maintain a log of all interactive network sessions, track all client and server application vulnerabilities, and track which systems communicate with other internal systems. One thing I want to mention is that application vulnerability scanners are different than environment application scanners. They're usually two different products. So for scanners, the different security products, some can combine different scanning capabilities. For example, network and configuration compliance. They one specific scanner can do all that. A wireless scanner can do all that, but depending on what you buy, I guess it can only do the security tool. Security tools can only do as much as you pay it for. A lot of security tools out there, if you buy like for example, a relatively expensive vulnerability scanner, you're not going to get all the functionality. You're only going to get some functionality like network scanning or only application scanning. Network mapping scanner pretty much combines network device discovery tools and network scanners to find open ports or discover shared folders. Uses can be used to create visual maps of the network. Wireless scanners discover malicious wireless network activities such as failed login attempts. It uses it to detect security weaknesses inside the local wireless network. Configuration compliance scanner used to evaluate and report compliance issues related to specific industry standards. Uses specifically, you can go off a baseline of what specific operating system configurations you want to have implemented, and then you can do a configuration compliance scan on that device. Usually you can pick up the compliance standards from I want to say NIST, National Institute of Technology and Standards. I may be wrong, but there's standards out there that you can pick up and scan against. So this is using Tenable's scanner. Tenable, great product, by the way. Really like them. Honeypot and HoneyNet. A honeypot is a computer protected by minimal security, intentionally configured with vulnerabilities, contains bogus data files. So essentially what honeypot is it's a benign or bogus system used as a distraction. So when attackers come in, right, they either attack that and they're getting nothing in fake data. Additionally, what it also offers is that if your honeypot is getting attacked, so your honeypot is usually not connected to anything. It's just like sitting separately, but on its own, but kind of in the same network. But if you identify that, oh, your honeypot is getting attacked, you know that nothing's talking to it. You know nothing, it's not supposed to be being used. So if that's being attacked, that means you're getting breached. And it can determine an attack. A honeynet is a network set up with one or more honeypots, set up intentionally with intentional vulnerabilities. Now, I don't know about the intentional vulnerabilities, but they're definitely set up to mimic what you have out there, what you have in production. But I guess it is true vulnerabilities just so you can see that they're easier to attack, just to make sure that it's easy for the attacker to get in, and then it can trigger off, hey, someone's attacking us. So banner grabbing tools. A banner is a message that a service transmits with another program connects when another program connects to it. Example: the banner for a HT. TP servers will typically show the type of server software, version number, when it was last modified, and other similar information. Banner grabbing: when a program is used to intentionally gather this information, can be used as an assessment tool to perform an inventory on the services and system operating on a server. So what do banner grabbing tools do? It just it talks to a device, a host, server, whatever it may be, and tries to grab banner information, kind of fingerprint exactly what it's using or what it is based on the banner. So crackers, intended to break the security of a system. Using a cracker in a vulnerability assessment can help determine how secure the system is. A wireless cracker is designed to test the security of a wireless LAN system by attempting to break its protections of Wi-Fi protection access, WPA or WPA2, and a password cracker intended to break the digest of a password, or the encryption of a password, determine its strength. So command line tools: you got ping, netsat, tracer, nslookup, dig, arp, ipconfig, IP, and ntcp dump. So these are all tools that can be used. I'm not going to go through each one of them, but usually network administrators, I'll let you go through these. Your labs will go through each one of, you will use pretty much every single one of these in your labs. But pretty much what a lot of the most command line tools that I use personally is tracer, nslookup, and ipconfig. Those are the top three that I use. Also ping once in a while, but there's other options than ping. NetSat is also very valuable, which displays detailed information about a device is communicating with. So there are third-party tools that can be used for vulnerability scanning. Nmap network, you guys will have an Nmap. Nmap is a vulnerability scanner. It's open source, it's free, and you guys will be using this in your labs to practice with a vulnerability scanner. You can determine what ports are open, right? And then you have netcat is a command line alternative to Nmap. It can be used itself or driven by other programs and scripts. You guys will play around with netcat as well. Netcat can also be used, be driven to use other programs and scripts if you wanted to, for example, create a shell into another computer. Exploitation framework. Exploitation framework is used to replicate attacks during a vulnerability assessment. Provides a structure of exploits and monitoring tools. Steganography. Steganography, a technology that hides the existence of data in a seemingly harmless data file, image, or audio file. It can be used. So essentially, steganography is. So when you're creating a picture, the picture has bits in it, right? You can change some of those bits without actually changing the file or the actual picture, and it can hide information within it, within that picture, because several of the bits change, but it's kind of it's showing, but the picture itself, you can't tell that it actually changed. Steganography assessment tools can be used to determine if the if data is hidden well enough to thwart unauthorized users from finding the data. So vulnerability scan, an automated software search through a system, right? So essentially you scan your vulnerability with your vulnerability scanners, and then usually you can create reports with the greatest risk and potential exposures, and you can compare them to baseline scans. Scan usually looks at vulnerabilities or weaknesses in the system, your device, your network, wherever it may be. It identifies lack of security controls and that are missing to establish a secure framework, and it can identify common misconfigurations in hardware and software. So 2 methods for performing vulnerability scanning is intrusive and non-intrusive. Intrusive attempts to actually penetrate the system to perform simulated attack. Non-intrusive uses only available information to hypothesize the status of the vulnerability. Credentialed vulnerability scan. So credentialed vulnerability scan, you are scanning against, for example, like a computer or server, but sometimes if you want to access, specific service, you need higher level of privileges. So in a credential vulnerability scan, you actually, in your vulnerability scanner, you provide either a service account or some privileged credentials for that. Use a service account. I think a service account is more applicable in your vulnerability scanner, and that will, when you scan, you use that service account with those credentials to see if test internal resources, services, whatever it may be. And non-credential scans do not use credentials. Most of the time, if you're scanning for vulnerabilities, I would say that you do not use credentials most of the time. So penetration testing. Testing is designed to exploit system weaknesses, relies on the tester's skill, knowledge, and cunningness. You can either have a red team, which is filled with penetration testers, or you can have contractors come out and do it. I know the military comes out and does penetration testing for all state departments. And usually they're done from penetrations are done, tests are done starting from the outside to get in, right? The end result, you get pretty much a very in-depth report of all your weaknesses and how to mitigate those vulnerabilities. So 3 different techniques can be used for penetration testing: black, white, and gray box testing. Black box testing is you have no prior knowledge of the infrastructure, so you have to first do a lot of reconnaissance. White box is a tester in depth of the knowledge and knows every of the network and systems being tested. Sometimes it can we can relate white box testers with internal if you're doing internal testing, but usually white box testers are also people that are disgruntled employees that want to hack from their their home computer after they were departed from the organization. They or did some social engineering and they mapped out their network. A gray box has some limited information has been provided to the tester, so only a little bit. White box testing, usually when you have so the difference is black box, you have no knowledge. White box testing, if it's being done by a third-party contractor, then you give information to the third-party contractor. Gray box, you only give some to the contractor or just limited knowledge for the attacker. So there's 2 methods of gathering information: active and passive reconnaissance. Active reconnaissance involves actively probing the system to find information. Passive, tester use tools that do not raise any alarms. You're kind of like passive scanning. You try to hide. You try to make as little noise as possible, and you don't interact. Passive reconnaissance usually also involves in not interacting with the people itself. It's mostly open source intelligence, or OSINT. Um, Active reconnaissance is like you're pinging the firewall or a specific server to see if it's up and running. And once the tester has gathered information, the next step is to perform an initial exploitation by using the information to determine if it provides entry to the secure network. Once you have enough information, identify an attack method or an attack vector and exploit, right? Once you get in, pivot. Usually attackers try to pivot, move inside the network, move laterally, and penetration testers are not going to set up. They're not going to set up a backdoor for to come back in a later time, like usual attackers do. But they're just trying to move from place to place, laterally traverse the network, and then gain until they can get some escalated privileges to go up the chain. A pen tester's goal is privilege escalation. We're exploiting a vulnerability, and testers must rely on persistence to continue to probe for weaknesses and exploit them. So, practicing data privacy and security. Enterprise data theft may involve stealing proprietary business information, such as research for a new product, HR data, PII, personally identifiable information, credit card information. Personal data theft involves user personal data, such as credit card numbers, identity theft. Also HIPAA information, which is medical information. Practicing data privacy and security involves understanding what privacy is and its risks, as well as practical steps in keeping data safe. So, just FYI, California is the only state as of right now with privacy laws. There are 18 other states that are coming out with them within the next couple of years, but California, we are the most proactive, and we have a lot of privacy laws. I actually think I have a list of them up here. Let me bring that up for you guys. Oh. Laws and regulations. Here is a bunch of privacy acts for California that we must abide by. Children's online privacy protection, all the way to the Privacy Act of 1974. And these are a little on the older side. I do not see California. So California's latest California Privacy Act 2020, so it goes into effect of January 1st. But essentially, this specific policy is what makes us different than every other state. We are the leaders of privacy in all the United States. And so, let's get back. From the current slide. All right. Okay, so what is privacy? Privacy is a state of condition of being free from public attention to the degree that you determine. The right to be left alone to the level that you choose. Data is collected on almost all actions we do today through web surfing, purchases, user surveys, and questionnaires. And data is then aggregated by data brokers who sell that data. So there's actually, I hate to break it to you guys, but all your ISPs and your telephone companies, whether it's AT&T, Verizon, whatever it is, they're actually collecting your data and they're actually selling it to the highest bidder. Whether they're good or bad, whoever has money, they're selling your information to it. But California, this new Privacy Act, let me quickly review it, read over it for you guys. Pretty much, it helps the consumers. Ads. All right. So essentially what the California Privacy Act gives, it ensures that businesses must inform customers of their intent to collect personal information. Consumers have the right to know what personal information is being collected and shared. Consumers have the right to prevent businesses from selling their personal information to third parties. So that's going to be interesting how that this is going to work with all those ISPs and your phone companies selling your information already. Consumers can request businesses to remove personal information that the business has on them, and businesses are prohibited from charging consumers different prices or refusing services, even if the consumer exercises their privacy rights. So privacy is a big deal these days because it's literally everywhere. So risks associated with privacy data. Risks that are associated falls into three categories: individual, inconvenience, and identity theft; associations and groups; statistical inferences. So risks have led to concern by individuals regarding how their privacy data is being used. There's a need to keep data private and secure for legal compliance issues. Requirements of legislation, prescribed rules and regulations, specified standards in terms of contract. And depending on the type of data, there's specific laws and rules and regulations. For example, HIPAA covers medical information. PCI DSS is credit card information. GLBA is financial for financial institutions. And then steps in maintaining data privacy and security, creating and following an overall security methodology and privacy policy, and communicating that out to your consumers of what your privacy policy is. Properly labeling and handling sensitive information. And that is also goes hand in hand with only allowing authorized users to access the data and giving people practicing the least privilege principle of only giving the minimum amount of data that someone needs to perform their job, and ensuring that the data is destroyed when no longer needed. No longer needed. And something to also add to HIPAA laws. So medical records are actually being more sought out after than actual credit card information or social security numbers these days, because medical information not only helps you with identity theft, can help attackers with identity theft, but usually HIPAA information is linked to credit card information. That's what they've been finding. So it's better you get kind of like a 2-for-1 instead of just going for credit card information. It not always relates back to medical information, but usually HIPAA information medical information comes back down to credit card information or some type of payment. So securing methodologies, standard techniques for mitigating and deterring attacks, creating a security posture, selecting and configuring controls, hardening, and reporting. So security posture describes an approach, philosophy, or strategy regarding security. Elements that make up a security posture is an initial baseline, continuous security monitoring, and remediation. For a baseline, you need standard security checks, and when you have a baseline, you can compare all deviations against that baseline. It helps you identify your standards, right? It helps you identify where your suspicious activity is, what's not up to date. Continuous security monitoring, it's never, security is always changing, and it's a never endless cycle. You're always observing systems and networks, looking to optimize processes and procedures. Once you find something, you go remediate it. And remember, risk is never 100% remediated. There will always be residual risk, and so you go remediate something you find, and then you have to continue to monitor that. That may be exploited later, even though it has been remediated over time. Maybe that remediation technique that you use can be exploited in a later attack. And there's thousands and thousands of vulnerabilities being exploited every single day. Remediation, as vulnerabilities are exposed, put plan in place to address them. Prioritize them, and then remediate them as best as you can with the amount of resources you have. If you can't, go back to your risk tolerance, talk to your executive, say, and understand your risk tolerance. If you don't remediate this is a risk, right? So, selecting appropriate controls. Remember, security goals are CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, availability. And then there's also safety, which is more of a physical type of security goal. So confidentiality ensures encryption, signography, access control. Integrity includes hashing, digital signature certificates, and non-repudiation tools. Availability is redundancy, fault tolerance, and patching. And then safety is fencing, lighting, locks, escape plans, routes, safety drills. So properly configuring controls is key to mitigating and deterring attacks. Some controls for detection include security cameras. Some preventions are properly positioned security guards, and information security controls can be configured to detect attacks and sound alarms or prevent attacks. Mostly, to be honest, they're emails being sent. Additional consideration: when a normal function is interrupted by failure, when a function is interrupted by failure, you have to determine whether what's more important, security or safety. So, with that being said, there's two options, right? You can either have a fail open or fail safe. If everything fails, do you either open everything up, or if everything fails, do you lock down and restrict everything? So in different scenarios, there's different ways to approach this. So for example, if a system fails within the prison, would you rather have a fail open or fail safe? Would you, if I don't know, the computer system within the prisons go out, right? They go down. Would you rather have all the jail cells open up through a fail open strategy, or a fail safe, constrict it, everyone gets locked in until the computer's back up and running, right? However, if you're talking about a public building catches on fire, would you rather have a fail open or fail safe? Would you lock all your unlocked doors, or would you open all your locked doors automatically, right? You don't, in a public building, you probably want to open all your doors so people can escape and run out of the fire. A firewall can be configured in fail safe or fail open state, just like regular doors. Hardening. The purpose of hardening is to eliminate as many security risks as possible. Types of hardening techniques include protecting accounts with passwords, disabling unnecessary accounts and services, and protecting against management interfaces and applications. Reporting is important to provide information regarding events that occur so that action can be taken. So whenever alerts happen or alarms happen, make sure there's a report that identifies what it did and what the remediation steps are. Or, for example, vulnerability scans, right? You have something to present with key performance indicators that shows, hey, these are the amount of vulnerabilities, these are how much that remediated since last time, vulnerabilities that were remediated from last time. It helps you gain you metrics too. And you need reports to show to the executive staff that you are finding value with all these security tools and security implementations. Reporting can provide information on trends and can indicate a serious impending situation. So if multiple user accounts experiencing multiple password attempts, meaning someone's doing like some type of password spraying attack. Data labeling and handling. Data sensitivity. Data must be properly labeled. If mislabeled, could be accidentally distributed. Data sensitivity labeling can help ensure proper data handling. Data labels. You have confidential, private, proprietary, public, PII, PHI. Confidential is the highest level of security. Private is restricted with medium level. Proprietary belongs to the enterprise. Public, no risk. PII is sensitive information to the based on the user, and PHI is health status, anything health related about a person. Handling the specific data. Confidentiality, private, proprietary, should all be determined by your organization, how they want to handle it. Everyone has a different risk tolerance. Public is public for all consumption. PII, you have to should be kept secure so that an individual cannot be singled out for identification, and PHI, keep up to HIPAA standards. I know HIPAA, you have to have everything. PCI is encrypted. So data destruction, it's really important to have a data retention policy. Paper media can be destroyed by burning, shredding, pulping, or pulverizing. Electronic medium. Data retention. Data should never be erased using the OS delete command. Data can be retrieved using third-party tools. It's burned into the hard drive itself. Wiping, overwriting the disk space with zeros or random data can be used, or degaussing is the most effective way. Permanently destroys the entire magnetic base drive and by reducing or eliminating the magnetic field. For data destruction. But ensure you have a data retention policy so you're not accidentally deleting everything. So chapter summary, we talked about vulnerability assessment, methodically evaluation of exposure of assets to risks. There are 5 steps in vulnerability assessment. One tool used to assist in determining potential threats is a process known as threat modeling. Several techniques can be used in vulnerability assessment. There's port scanners, protocols. There's several tools, scanners, protocol analyzers, honeypots are assessment tools. Banner grabbing can be used to perform an inventory of the services and systems operating on a server. Vulnerability scan searches for system known weaknesses within an environment or a system. Penetration testing is designed to exploit vulnerabilities from external. Testers may have various levels of knowledge and usually done by a third party, or if you have a red team within your organization. Privacy is defined as a state of condition of being free from public attention to the degree that you determine. Standard techniques used to mitigate and deter attacks. Ensure that you have a healthy security posture, proper configuration and controls, and hardening and reporting is managed. And that's it. That's chapter 13 for you guys.